My name is Randy Weiss. I'm the practice manager in LogixOne for virtualization and data management. We handle design and consulting and implementation of services and products in the virtualized data center. And I'd like to talk today about some of the things going on in the data management market. I think that there's been a lot of change in the last few years, and this last year in particular, some trends have started to take off, while others that we thought would already be hot and mainstream and have large market share have cooled off. So I wrote a blog about this recently, 10 storage predictions for 2014. And there's a few of them that I like to go into in a little bit more detail. One of them is DRaaS, or Disaster Recovery as a Service. Disaster Recovery as a Service seems ready-made for cloud technology and for companies for wide adoption. So going back a few years, there were some big problems in making disaster recovery as a service work. And it primarily had more to do with the business model, although some of the technologies were lacking. By business model, I mean companies that are telcos traditionally don't really handle reselling of services the same way that a traditional IT vendor would. So understanding how to bill, give customers visibility, truly making cloud technologies, cloud computing, whatever it may be, self-service were a problem. Disaster recovery had some additional problems because all of the technologies that we would use in our own data center in order to recover virtual machines in a separate infrastructure require access to all of the infrastructure at an administrative level or root level. And that's simply not possible in a disaster recovery infrastructure which is shared and multi-tenant. The last thing you want when you're in a disaster recovery environment is to have, when you're running one, is to have a customer suddenly decide they want to turn on everything and you have no control over it, and they start grabbing storage and spinning up VMs, and this makes other customers' infrastructure suffer. So that's a problem. Being able to bill correctly is a problem. Making it self-service has been a problem. So it's kind of an access rights, management, and a technology, but mainly a business problem. And a lot of these problems have been overcome recently. There's one particular technology that has enabled cloud computing providers to be able to offer a subset of cloud computing services for disaster recovery. And that means that the virtual machine can be replicated VM by VM, which is important. You're going to be charged less per month for the running of that VM because it's not really running, it's not really consuming infrastructure. And you can make an environment that won't be oversubscribed. And by that I mean the traditional SunGard and IBM information protection services model is that you would basically oversubscribe. You're counting on everybody not showing up at once. And this began in the mainframe days, where you could take one large computing device and slice it up into different parts for customers to use for mission critical stuff in a disaster. When you went into open systems, it got to be a little bit more complex because if you're oversubscribed in your computing resources in a disaster recovery scenario, 10 to 1 say, if all those people show up at once, not everybody can actually get access to the computing resources they've contracted for. In a virtualization environment, it's actually a lot more feasible and a lot more affordable. So if the company that's trying to provide cloud computing decides to extend an offering in disaster recovery, they can take their equipment, maybe at a lower tier performance, maybe higher capacity, and they'll be able to offer that infrastructure, not oversubscribed, price it correctly, and really in virtual computing, the most important and expensive part of the cost for a service provider is RAM and CPU. Storage can be pretty cheap. So when companies started to figure out that, number one, I can't actually afford this, I know how to price it, I know how to predict my utilization, and that's my cost. I know the customers don't want to pay full cost for a disaster recovery virtual machine, and I need to make it self-service. When all these obstacles started to become overcome, now disaster recovery in the cloud starts to make sense, and for a couple of reasons. Number one, for the consumer of that service, the typical small business or commercial enterprise, they no longer have to buy infrastructure. That's a huge savings of capital expenditure, and there are some financial calculations for return on investment and total cost of ownership that can prove pretty readily that even in a fairly large disaster recovery environment, at the end of 3 to 4 years, You're not going to be spending any more money in a disaster recovery as a service where you're not buying the equipment than you would if you bought the equipment. And at the end of 3 or 4 years, you have to refresh all of your equipment. So you have to go through this whole process again. So saving on that capital investment is very important, and it being flexible. So for example, if a company decides they're going to build a disaster recovery infrastructure, they have to size it to where they are at that point in time, or where they think they're going to be in 4 to 5 months. Well, if the company shrinks or grows, they have to change that. If it shrinks, they've overpurchased. If it doesn't shrink and it grows too much, then doesn't have enough capacity. This has happened to one of our customers recently. And they are committed to in-house disaster recovery because they're a healthcare provider, and the data just can't be put into a cloud. And it's a performance issue also. But finally, the last thing is the speed to complete the project. When you're building your own disaster recovery infrastructure, it takes literally months to get something stood up. Most larger disaster recovery projects that we've implemented, and again, this is talking mainly about IT, not business continuity, it still takes a month or two to design it and to get the equipment shipped and on site. And then you have to install it. You have to put all the software in, you have to do all the configuration, you have to configure replication. The customers, people have to be trained on how to run it and how to maintain it. And it takes a long time. 6 months is about average. But when you do disaster recovery as a service, you can be up and running in as little as a month. So that speed to market, that lower cost, that self-service aspect of it, that targeted use of cloud technology is what makes disaster recovery as a service work. Not everybody's ready to just pick up their data center and throw it into the cloud. The targeted use of certain technologies make a lot of sense. Other things, not so much. And again, it all depends on the customer, it depends on their privacy requirements, depends on their latency concerns, depends on their capacity. But disaster recovery as a service has, I think, risen to the top as far as an excellent use, excellent and efficient and cost-effective use of cloud technologies.